The air recyclers hummed their familiar tune aboard the Galactic Defense Station Zirion 7, a massive orbital fortress that housed representatives from 43 different species. Commander Zura Kethril of the Valdorian Empire stood at the observation deck, her crystalline blue skin catching the light from the nearby star system. Her four arms moved in practice coordination as she reviewed the latest intelligence reports on her holographic display. The war against the Nexus Collective had been raging for 18 standard cycles now. What started as a territorial dispute over mining rights in the Outer Rim had escalated into a full-scale galactic conflict. The Collective, a hive mind species that consumed entire worlds to fuel their expansion, had proven to be a formidable enemy. Their ships were organic monstrosities that could regenerate damage in real time, and their ground forces moved with terrifying coordination. Zara's mandibles clicked in frustration as she studied the casualty reports. The Galactic Defense Coalition had lost another 3 systems in the past month. Despite having superior numbers and technology from dozens of advanced civilizations, they were losing ground. The Nexus adapted too quickly, learned too fast, and struck with a ruthlessness that even the most battle-hardened species found disturbing. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Zara's aide, a young Thraxian with iridescent feathers, approached with obvious nervousness. "Commander, High Admiral Vextar requests your immediate presence in the strategy chamber. He says it's about the new asset." Zara's primary eyes narrowed, while her secondary pair continued monitoring the displays. She had heard rumors about this mysterious new asset. Whispers in the corridors spoke of a species so primitive that they had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, yet somehow their representatives had gained an audience with the highest levels of Coalition command. The strategy chamber was a circular room with a massive holographic star map at its center, showing the current state of the war in 3 dimensions. Red zones marked Nexus-controlled territory, which had grown significantly larger since their last major offensive. Blue indicated Coalition space, and the neutral zones were marked in yellow. The sight was not encouraging. High Admiral Vextar, a towering Krillian with 6 arms and bioluminescent patches along his exoskeleton, stood beside a figure that made Zara pause. The being was small by galactic standards, barely reaching her shoulder height, with only 2 arms and 2 legs. Its skin was a pale pink color, and, strangely, it was covered in what appeared to be synthetic materials rather than natural armor or fur. "Commander Kethril," Vextar's voice resonated through his thoracic chambers. "Allow me to introduce Sergeant Marcus Kane of the human species. The Coalition Council has decided to experiment with their unconventional approaches to warfare." The human turned to face her, and Zara was struck by something unsettling in its eyes. They were small and forward-facing, clearly those of a predator, but there was an intelligence there that seemed both ancient and dangerous. When it spoke, its voice was surprisingly steady and measured. "Commander Kethril, I've read your tactical assessments of the Nexus forces. Impressive work, especially your analysis of their hive cluster formations." Marcus extended one of his primitive 2-digit appendages in what she later learned was called a handshake. "I think there might be some strategies my people could contribute to your war effort." Zara found herself oddly compelled by the human's direct manner. Most species approached military discussions with elaborate protocols and formal exchanges. This creature simply stated facts and offered solutions. She accepted the handshake, noting that despite its small size, the human's grip was surprisingly firm. "High Admiral," she addressed Vextar, while keeping one eye on the human, "what exactly do you expect this Marcus Kane to contribute? No offense intended, but his species has only recently achieved interstellar capability. We're fighting an enemy that has consumed dozens of advanced civilizations." Vextar's bioluminescent patches flickered in what Zara recognized as his equivalent of a grimace. The Council believes that sometimes a fresh perspective from a species with different evolutionary pressures might provide insights we've overlooked. Sergeant Kane will be assigned to your tactical division for a trial period. Marcus stepped forward, his movements precise and controlled. Commander, I know this seems unusual, but humans have been fighting wars for our entire evolutionary history. We've had to develop creative solutions to survive. I've studied your reports on Nexus tactics, and I think I see patterns you might have missed. Zara's mandibles clicked in skepticism. What patterns could you possibly identify that our best strategists have overlooked? We have military minds from species that have been fighting interstellar wars for millennia. The human's expression shifted slightly, and Zara caught a glimpse of something predatory in his demeanor. That's exactly the problem, Commander. You've been fighting civilized wars against civilized enemies. The Nexus isn't civilized. They're an existential threat, and you can't defeat an existential threat with conventional tactics. Marcus moved to the holographic display and gestured toward a cluster of red zones. Look at their expansion pattern. It's not random. They're not just consuming resources. They're systematically isolating your major population centers. In human military doctrine, we call this a siege strategy, but they're applying it on a galactic scale. Zara studied the map with fresh eyes, and for the first time, she began to see what the human was pointing out. The Nexus hadn't just been taking territory. They'd been cutting supply lines and communication networks, gradually choking off the Coalition's ability to coordinate large-scale responses. Even if your analysis is correct, she said slowly, what do you propose we do about it? The Nexus has overwhelming numbers and adaptive capabilities that make direct confrontation extremely costly. Marcus's eyes took on a distant look, and when he spoke, his voice carried a chill that made Zara's crystalline skin actually change temperature. Commander, has your coalition ever considered the concept of total war? High Admiral Vextar's bioluminescent patches flared in alarm. Sergeant Kane, the coalition operates under the Galactic Warfare Accords. We do not target civilian populations or engage in tactics that could be considered war crimes. The human nodded slowly. I understand your moral framework, Admiral, but the Nexus doesn't share it. They're committing genocide on a galactic scale, and you're trying to stop them with rules they don't acknowledge. Sometimes, to defeat a monster, you have to become something monstrous yourself. Zara felt a chill run through her four-chambered heart. There was something in the human's tone that suggested he wasn't speaking theoretically. This was a species that had apparently faced extinction-level threats before and survived by embracing tactics that other species would consider unthinkable. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Marcus manipulated the holographic display with surprising proficiency, highlighting several Nexus-controlled systems. The Nexus operates as a hive mind, but they still require communication networks to coordinate across interstellar distances. They've established relay stations in these systems to maintain their psychic links. Your conventional strategy has been to avoid these heavily fortified positions. Because attacking them would be suicide, Vextar interjected. Each relay station is defended by hundreds of Nexus vessels and ground forces. Exactly. Marcus replied with what Zara would later recognize as a predatory smile, which is why they don't expect you to attack them. But what if you didn't attack the stations themselves? What if you attacked the stars they orbit? The chamber fell silent except for the gentle hum of the station systems. Zara's mind raced as she processed the implications of what the human was suggesting. You're talking about stellar destruction that would eliminate entire systems, including any civilian populations that might still be alive in those areas. Marcus's expression remained unchanged. The Nexus doesn't take prisoners, Commander. Any civilian populations in those systems are already dead or being processed into biomass. And, yes, I'm talking about collapsing stars. Humans developed the theoretical framework for stellar engineering centuries ago, though we've never had reason to implement it on this scale. High Admiral Vextar's exoskeleton clicked in agitation. Such weapons are prohibited under every galactic treaty. The technology exists, but it has never been used because the moral implications. The moral implications, Marcus interrupted, are that either you win this war, by any means necessary, or the Nexus consumes every living being in the galaxy. There is no middle ground with an existential threat. Zara found herself studying the human with a mixture of fascination and horror. His species was clearly apex predators, but there was more to it than that. They had apparently faced their own extinction events and survived by developing a willingness to do whatever was necessary. The casual way he discussed planetary genocide suggested that humans had not only theorized such scenarios, but had probably implemented them. Even if we were to consider such tactics, she said carefully, we would need detailed technical specifications for stellar destabilization. The physics involved are extremely complex. Marcus reached into a small carrying case and produced a data crystal. Human scientists have been modeling stellar collapse scenarios since we first understood nuclear fusion. The mathematics are actually quite elegant once you account for the magnetic field interactions. Zara accepted the crystal with two of her hands while her other pair continued working the displays. The casual way the human had produced such devastating information was almost as disturbing as the information itself. This suggested that humans routinely prepared for scenarios that other species couldn't even imagine. There's something else you should consider, Marcus continued, his voice taking on an even more ominous tone. The Nexus has been expanding consistently because they assume their enemies will fight according to predictable patterns. They adapt to conventional tactics because that's what they expect. But what happens when you introduce chaos into their system? Chaos, Vextar asked, though Zara suspected she was beginning to understand where this was leading. Marcus manipulated the display again, showing Nexus fleet movements over the past several months. Look at their response patterns. When you attack a position, they reinforce it with forces drawn from surrounding systems. When you retreat, they advance in formation. Everything they do is based on the assumption that their enemies will act rationally. Zara studied the patterns and realized that the human was correct. Nexus tactics were incredibly sophisticated, but they followed logical progressions based on conventional military doctrine. You're suggesting we introduce irrational elements into our strategy. I'm suggesting you stop thinking like a civilization and start thinking like a species fighting for survival, Marcus replied. Humans have a saying, if you're not cheating, you're not trying hard enough. The Nexus expects you to fight fair. That expectation is their weakness. The implications of what the human was suggesting began to sink in for Zara. This wasn't just about new tactics or technologies. This was about fundamentally changing how the coalition approached warfare. Instead of seeking decisive battles and territorial control, they would need to embrace asymmetric warfare, terror tactics, and strategies that prioritize psychological impact over military efficiency. High Admiral Vextar's bioluminescent patches had dimmed considerably. Sergeant Kane, what you're describing sounds like the tactics of pirates and raiders, not a legitimate military force. Marcus's expression hardened. Admiral, with all due respect, legitimate military forces don't win wars against extinction events. They die with honor while their species gets consumed. Humans have been fighting extinction for millions of years. We're here because our ancestors were willing to do whatever it took to survive. Zara felt a chill of recognition. The human wasn't just proposing tactics. He was offering to teach them how to think like apex predators. Every species in the coalition had evolved past their most savage instincts to build civilizations. But humans seemed to have retained those instincts while building their technology around them. Commander Kethril, Marcus addressed her directly. I know this is difficult to accept, but look at your casualty reports. Look at how much territory you've lost. Your current approach isn't working, and the Nexus is getting stronger every day. How many more worlds are you willing to lose while trying to fight a clean war? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Zara knew he was right about the casualty reports. They were losing badly, and conventional tactics weren't providing any path to victory. But accepting the human's approach would mean abandoning everything the coalition stood for. What would you need to implement these strategies? She asked finally. Marcus's predatory smile returned. Access to your weapons development facilities, detailed intelligence on Nexus communication networks, and a small fleet of ships that can be modified for unconventional operations. I'd also need a team of volunteers who are willing to embrace tactics that might not be considered honorable. Volunteers for what exactly? Vextar demanded. For becoming something the Nexus has never faced before, Marcus replied. For becoming the thing that predators fear when they're alone in the dark. Humans have another saying, Admiral. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good beings to do nothing. Sometimes, stopping evil requires becoming something that good beings fear. Zara realized that this moment would define not just the war, but the future of galactic civilization. If they accepted the humans' approach and won, they would forever be changed by what they had done. If they rejected it and lost, there would be no one left to judge their moral choices. I'll need to review these technical specifications, she said finally, and I'll need detailed projections on the potential effectiveness of these unconventional tactics. Marcus nodded. I'll prepare comprehensive briefings on human military doctrine. But, Commander, there's something you need to understand about the path we're discussing. Once you start down this road, there's no going back. You can't unleash this kind of warfare and then pretend it never happened. Win or lose, you'll have to live with what you become. As the meeting concluded and Marcus left the strategy chamber, Zara found herself staring at the data crystal containing the stellar destruction protocols. The weight of it felt far heavier than its actual mass. She was holding the power to kill stars, and a species barely out of their technological infancy had casually handed it to her. Over the following days, Zara threw herself into studying the humans' proposals. The mathematics of stellar destabilization were indeed elegant, but the implications were staggering. A single implementation could eliminate an entire star system and everything in it. The tactical applications were obvious, but the moral weight was crushing. What disturbed her even more were the supplementary files Marcus had provided. Humans had apparently developed contingency plans for dozens of extinction scenarios, from asteroid impacts to hostile alien invasions. Their military doctrine included strategies for fighting enemies with superior technology, overwhelming numbers, or adaptive capabilities. Every scenario ended with humanity's survival, regardless of the cost to anyone else. She began to understand that this wasn't just about tactics. Humans were a species that had evolved to survive by any means necessary. They had retained their predatory instincts even while developing advanced technology and complex social structures. Other species had evolved beyond their primitive violent tendencies. Humans had evolved to weaponize them. The more she studied their proposals, the more she realized that Marcus had been understating their capabilities. Humans didn't just have theories about stellar destruction. They had contingency plans for destroying entire sectors if necessary. They had strategies for fighting wars across multiple dimensions, tactics for psychological warfare that could break the minds of entire species, and weapons concepts that other civilizations had never imagined. But what truly terrified her was the realization that Marcus had been holding back. The casual way he discussed genocide and stellar destruction suggested that these were relatively mild options in human military doctrine. If this was what they offered to allies, what did they keep in reserve? As she prepared her report for High Admiral Vextar, Zara found herself facing a question that would haunt her for the rest of her life. In trying to save galactic civilization from the Nexus, were they about to hand it over to something potentially far worse? The data crystal sat on her desk, containing the power to kill stars and the knowledge of a species that had apparently been preparing for galactic war since they first looked at the night sky. She had asked for a consultant to help with tactical problems. Instead, she had been offered a teacher who could show them how to become the monsters that monsters feared. And the most terrifying part was that she was beginning to think they had no choice but to accept 3 weeks after Marcus Kane had first entered the Coalition's war planning. Zara found herself standing in a converted storage bay that had been transformed into something that defied every military protocol she had ever learned. The humans called it a war room, but it looked more like the lair of a particularly organized madman. Holographic displays covered every surface, showing real-time intelligence feeds from across the galaxy. Star charts had been annotated with symbols that seemed to categorize systems not by their strategic value, but by how efficiently they could be destroyed. Personnel files were sorted according to psychological profiles that evaluated willingness to commit acts that most species would consider war crimes. Marcus stood at the center of it all, no longer wearing the simple uniform of a coalition sergeant. Instead, he wore what he called human battle dress, a matte black outfit that seemed to absorb light and was covered with equipment whose purposes Zara preferred not to contemplate. More disturbing was how he carried himself now. The polite, measured demeanor he had shown in their first meeting had been replaced by something that made her survival instincts scream warnings. "Commander," Marcus acknowledged her arrival without turning around. "Perfect timing. We're about to begin the first phase of what humans call shock and awe." Zara approached the central display, where Marcus was manipulating a tactical projection of the Kepler 442 system. It was a Nexus relay station, one of the smaller ones, but still defended by over 300 enemy vessels and an estimated 50,000 ground troops. "What exactly are you planning?" she asked, though part of her suspected she already knew. Marcus smiled, and Zara realized that she had never seen a truly predatory expression until that moment. "We're going to teach the Nexus what humans call total war. But first, we need to gather some intelligence, and the best way to do that is to make them react to something they've never seen before." He gestured to one section of the display where a small flotilla of modified coalition ships was moving toward the system. Those vessels have been equipped with human-designed weapons, not the stellar destruction devices. We're saving those for later. These are what we call psychological warfare tools. Zara studied the ship specifications and felt her crystalline skin grow cold. The modifications were subtle, but terrifying. Weapons designed not to destroy enemy vessels quickly, but to disable them slowly and brutally. Communication jammers that would flood Nexus psychic networks with feedback that humans called screaming static. Boarding pods equipped with what the technical specifications euphemistically labeled terror devices. "Marcus," she said slowly, "these modifications suggest you intend to take prisoners. The Nexus doesn't surrender. Their hive mind programming won't allow it." "I know," Marcus replied with casual indifference. "We're not trying to capture prisoners. We're trying to create psychological trauma that will propagate through their psychic network. Every Nexus drone that experiences what we're about to do will transmit that experience to the entire hive mind." The implications hit Zara like a physical blow. "You're planning to torture them. You're going to deliberately inflict suffering on captured enemies, knowing that their psychic links will force thousands of others to experience it." Marcus turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw something that made her understand why humans had become apex predators on their world. "Commander, the Nexus has consumed over 40 billion sentient beings in this war alone. They process living creatures into biomass while keeping them conscious during the entire procedure. What I'm planning is a mild inconvenience compared to what they do routinely." Before Zara could respond, the tactical display erupted with activity. The human-modified ships had reached the outer edges of the Kepler 442 system and were beginning their attack. But instead of the usual coalition tactics of direct engagement, they were implementing something that looked more like terrorism than military strategy. The lead ship launched what appeared to be standard torpedoes, but when they impacted Nexus vessels, they didn't explode. Instead, they burrowed into the hulls and began releasing some kind of gas. The affected ships didn't lose power or structural integrity, but their movements became erratic, almost frenzied. "What did you do to them?" Zara demanded. Marcus was monitoring multiple data streams with the focused intensity of a natural predator. "Humans discovered something interesting about Nexus biology during our preliminary research. Their psychic connections rely on specific neurotransmitter balances. disrupt those balances, and the individual drones experience something analogous to panic attacks, but the psychological trauma transmits through their network. On the display, Zara could see the effects spreading. Ships that hadn't been directly attacked were beginning to exhibit the same erratic behavior. The Nexus's greatest strength, their psychic unity, was being turned into a weakness that amplified psychological damage across their entire local network. But Marcus wasn't finished. The second wave of modified ships launched boarding pods toward the disabled vessels. These pods used gravitational anchors to attach to Nexus hulls and began cutting through with what the specifications call slow-burn plasma cutters. The process was deliberately designed to take as long as possible while generating maximum fear and anticipation in the defenders. "This is monstrous," Zara whispered, but she couldn't look away from the display. "No," Marcus replied calmly. "Monstrous would be processing 40 billion sentient beings in a biomass. This is just effective psychological warfare against an enemy that shares sensory experiences through psychic links." When the boarding pods finally penetrated the Nexus hulls, what happened next defied every convention of civilized warfare. Instead of trying to capture strategic positions or disable the ships, the human-designed assault teams were implementing what Marcus called fear protocols. They weren't trying to win quickly. They were trying to maximize the psychological impact on every Nexus drone that experienced the attack through their shared consciousness. The results were immediate and terrifying. Nexus ships throughout the system began retreating, not in the organized tactical withdrawal they typically employed, but in what appeared to be genuine panic. For the first time in the war, the hive mind species was exhibiting something that looked like fear. Impossible, Zara breted. The Nexus doesn't experience emotions like fear. Their hive mind programming eliminates individual survival instincts. Marcus was studying the psychological impact readings with obvious satisfaction. "That's what they want you to think, Commander. But fear isn't really an emotion, it's a survival mechanism. And every survival mechanism can be weaponized if you understand the underlying biology." The tactical display showed Nexus reinforcements arriving in the system, but their approach was hesitant, almost cautious. The psychological trauma being transmitted through their psychic network was making them afraid to engage, something that had never happened in 18 cycles of warfare. "How is this possible?" Zara asked. "You've been studying their biology for less than a month." Marcus's expression took on that unsettling predatory quality again. "Commander, humans have been studying fear for our entire evolutionary history. We know how to create it, how to use it, and how to turn it into a weapon. The Nexus might be technologically advanced, but they've never faced a species that evolved specifically to be the thing that other species fear." Over the following hours, the psychological effects continued to spread through the Nexus network. Ships in other systems began exhibiting similar erratic behaviors. And for the first time since the war began, Nexus expansion actually slowed as they diverted resources to understand this new threat. But Marcus wasn't content with a single psychological victory. "Commander, this was just the opening move. Now we begin Phase 2. Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature control. "What's Phase 2? Marcus manipulated the holographic display to show a different system, one of the major Nexus strongholds with multiple relay stations and hundreds of thousands of enemy forces. Phase 2 is where we teach them what happens when they make humans angry." The technical specifications that appeared on the display made Zara's primary heart skip beats. Marcus had been working with coalition weapons developers to create what he called escalation protocols. These weren't just more powerful weapons. They were systems designed to increase the psychological impact of every attack exponentially. "Marcus, these designs, some of them violate the fundamental laws of physics as we understand them." "Only if you assume that physics operates the same way in all dimensions," Marcus replied casually. "Humans have theories about multidimensional warfare. We've never had reason to test them before, but desperate times." Zara realized that what she was seeing represented only a fraction of human military capabilities. Marcus had been introducing their concepts gradually, allowing the coalition to adjust to each escalation before revealing the next level of destructive potential. But now she was beginning to see the true scope of what humans had prepared for. "How long have your people been planning for galactic warfare?" she asked. Marcus paused in his manipulations of the display. "Commander, humans have been planning for every conceivable extinction scenario since we first developed abstract reasoning. We have contingency plans for alien invasions, dimensional incursions, temporal paradoxes, and scenarios that don't have names in your language. But you've only recently achieved interstellar travel." "Physical interstellar travel," Marcus corrected. "We've been exploring alternative methods of projecting force across galactic distances for centuries. The Nexus isn't the first hostile alien species we've encountered, just the first one that required us to reveal ourselves." The implications of that statement hit Zara like a quantum torpedo. Humans have been secretly observing galactic civilization for centuries, studying potential threats and developing countermeasures. They had achieved interstellar capability long before making contact, which meant everything about their primitive status had been deliberately misleading. "You've been watching us," she said, not making it a question. Marcus nodded. "We've been watching everyone, Commander. Humans learned long ago that the best way to survive is to know everything about potential threats before they know you exist. We've had detailed files on every major galactic civilization for over 300 years, including detailed knowledge of our military capabilities, especially our military capabilities." Marcus's expression became almost apologetic. "Commander, we know exactly how to defeat every fleet in the coalition military. We've run the simulations thousands of times. The only reason we approach the coalition as allies is because the Nexus represents a threat to us as well." Zara felt the ground shifting beneath her, both literally and metaphorically. "So this entire alliance is based on mutual necessity, not shared values." "All successful alliances are based on mutual necessity," Marcus replied. "But that doesn't mean we intend to betray you, Commander. Humans have learned that the best way to ensure our own survival is to ensure the survival of species that could be useful allies." Before Zara could process the full implications of that statement, alarms began sounding throughout the war room. The tactical displays erupted with urgent communications from coalition forces across the galaxy. The Nexus was responding to the psychological warfare attack with something unprecedented. "What are they doing?" Zara demanded, studying the flood of intelligence reports. Marcus was analyzing the data with inhuman speed, his fingers dancing across multiple control interfaces simultaneously. "They're implementing what humans would call a scorched earth strategy. Instead of trying to adapt to our psychological warfare, they're cutting off the affected portions of their network." The implications were staggering. The Nexus was deliberately severing psychic connections with thousands of their own ships and ground forces, essentially lobotomizing entire military units to prevent the spread of psychological contamination. It was a level of ruthless calculation that even humans found impressive. Zara struggled to find words for what she was seeing. "Brilliant," Marcus finished. "And exactly what we hoped they would do." Zara stared at him in shock. "You wanted them to lobotomize their own forces?" Marcus's predatory smile returned. "Commander, severed Nexus units don't just lose their psychic connections. They lose their coordination, their tactical intelligence, and their ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. They become isolated units operating on basic programming, which makes them easier to destroy. Much easier. But more importantly, it means the Nexus has just demonstrated that they're willing to sacrifice thousands of their own units to counter our psychological warfare. That gives us valuable intelligence about their decision-making processes and their hierarchy of values." Zara realized that Marcus had been playing a game several moves ahead of everyone else, including her. The psychological attack hadn't been designed to win a single engagement. It had been designed to force the Nexus to reveal information about their internal command structure and strategic priorities. "What's the next phase?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Marcus manipulated the display to show a star chart of the entire war zone. "Now we begin the real war, Commander. Everything up to this point has been reconnaissance. The Nexus has shown us their capabilities, their limitations, and their decision-making processes. Now we teach them why humans are the apex predators of our galaxy." The star chart began highlighting systems in a pattern that made Zara's blood run cold. Marcus wasn't planning individual battles or tactical engagements. He was planning the systematic destruction of the Nexus's ability to wage war on a galactic scale. "You're planning to destroy entire sectors," she realized. "I'm planning to win," Marcus corrected. "Commander, the Nexus has proven they're willing to consume every living being in the galaxy. That makes this an extinction war, and extinction wars have only one acceptable outcome." As Zara stared at the tactical projections, she realized that she was witnessing the emergence of something that galactic civilization had never seen before. Not just a new military strategy, but a new form of warfare that treated the destruction of entire civilizations as a tactical option. Marcus was no longer just a human sergeant offering unconventional tactics. He had become something that her species had no name for, a being capable of planning genocide on a galactic scale with the same casual efficiency that other species plan planetary assaults. And the most terrifying part was that she was beginning to understand that he might be right. The Nexus couldn't be defeated with conventional warfare. They adapted too quickly, learned too fast, and had too many resources. The only way to stop them was to embrace tactics that were so extreme that even the idea of them would break the psychic unity that made the Nexus so effective. But accepting Marcus's strategy would mean becoming something that every civilized species would fear. Win or lose, the coalition would be forever changed by what they were about to do. And Zara was beginning to suspect that Marcus had planned it that way from the beginning. The humans hadn't just come to help win a war. They had come to transform galactic civilization into something more like themselves, something capable of surviving by any means necessary. And they were using the Nexus threat as justification for teaching other species to think like apex predators. As the alarms continued to sound, and Marcus began implementing the next phase of his strategy, Zara realized that she was no longer just witnessing the evolution of military tactics. She was watching the birth of a new form of civilization, one where survival trumped morality and efficiency justified any level of brutality. And despite her growing horror at what they were becoming, she couldn't bring herself to stop it, because deep down, she was beginning to understand that Marcus was right about one thing. Sometimes, to defeat a monster, you had to become something that monsters feared. The war was about to change in ways that no one except the humans had anticipated. And Commander Zurakethril was about to discover just how far a civilized species could fall when their survival was at stake. The stellar destruction began at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time, in the Arcturus 7 system. Zara watched from the observation deck of the newly designated Strategic Operations Center, a facility that Marcus had transformed from a standard coalition command post into something that resembled the nerve center of a galactic empire. The massive view screen showed the target star in real time, a red giant that had been selected not for its strategic importance, but for its psychological impact. Marcus stood beside her, no longer bothering with the pretense of being a simple sergeant. Over the past month, he had assumed de facto control of coalition special operations, and nobody had questioned his authority. The results spoke for themselves. 3 major Nexus strongholds had fallen to psychological warfare, and Nexus expansion had completely stopped for the first time in 18 cycles. "The stellar destabilization device is in position," reported Lieutenant Commander Thex, a Valdorian who had become one of Marcus's most devoted followers. Zara found it disturbing how easily other species had adapted to human leadership once they saw the results. "Confirmed," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to resonate on a frequency that made other species instinctively obey. Initiate sequence. On the view screen, a device no larger than a coalition shuttle approached the star's corona. It looked insignificant against the massive ball of nuclear fire, but Zara knew it contained technology that would have been considered impossible just months ago. Human physicists had apparently been developing stellar engineering techniques for centuries, waiting for a situation that justified their use. The device disappeared into the star's outer layers, and for several minutes, nothing happened. Then, the star began to change. Not explosively, not dramatically, but with a subtle shift in color and intensity that indicated fundamental alterations to its nuclear processes. Stellar collapse will begin in approximately 14 hours, Marcus announced to the assembled staff. All Nexus forces in the system will have plenty of time to detect the instability and evacuate. The psychological impact will be far greater than the tactical value. Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. Marcus, you're destroying an entire star system. There might be planets with indigenous life. Marcus turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that had been growing stronger over the past month. It wasn't cruelty or madness. It was the cold calculation of a being that had evolved to make decisions that other species couldn't even contemplate. Commander, our intelligence indicates that the Nexus consumed all indigenous life in that system 8 months ago. We're not destroying a living world. We're denying the enemy a resource base and demonstrating capabilities they didn't know we possessed. The tactical display updated with new information as Nexus forces throughout the sector began responding to the stellar destabilization. Their reaction was immediate and exactly what Marcus had predicted. Instead of the coordinated tactical responses they usually employed, Nexus ships were fleeing the area in what appeared to be genuine panic. Impossible, breathed Admiral Vextar, who had arrived to observe the operation. The Nexus doesn't panic. Their hive mind programming eliminates individual fear responses. Their hive mind programming was designed to deal with conventional threats, Marcus replied. They never developed psychological defenses against a species that uses fear as a weapon. When you transmit the experience of watching a star die through a psychic network, the effect is considerable. The view screen showed the Nexus evacuation in real time. Ships that had defended strategic positions for cycles were abandoning them without a fight. But more disturbing was what the fleeing vessels were doing to their own infrastructure. Rather than leave anything that might be useful to coalition forces, they were systematically destroying everything as they retreated. They're implementing total scorched earth protocols, observed Commander Keltar, one of the coalition's most experienced strategists. They're denying us any strategic gains from this operation. Marcus's expression shifted into what Zara had learned to recognize as his teaching mode. Commander Keltar, you're thinking tactically instead of strategically. We're not trying to capture territory. We're trying to break their psychological cohesion. Every Nexus drone that experiences the terror of watching a star collapse transmits that experience to the entire hive mind. But they're destroying their own infrastructure to prevent us from benefiting, which means they're making decisions based on fear instead of optimal strategy. Marcus explained with the patience of someone educating a child. A frightened enemy makes mistakes. A desperate enemy makes bigger mistakes. And a panicking enemy stops thinking altogether. As if to prove his point, the tactical display began showing Nexus responses across the entire galactic conflict zone. Ships that hadn't been anywhere near the Arcturus 7 system were exhibiting erratic behavior. Some were retreating from positions they had held for years. Others were launching premature attacks on coalition forces, abandoning their usual careful tactical approach. The psychological effects are propagating through their network faster than we projected, reported the intelligence staff. We're seeing behavioral changes in Nexus forces up to 8 sectors away from the primary operation. Marcus nodded with obvious satisfaction. The hive mind that makes them so effective in conventional warfare becomes a liability when they're experiencing trauma. Every Nexus drone in the galaxy is now afraid of what humans might do next. Zara studied the spreading effects on the tactical display and realized that Marcus had achieved something unprecedented. Not just a military victory, but a psychological transformation of the entire war. For the first time, the Nexus was acting defensively, and their defensive actions were driven by fear rather than strategy. "What's the next phase?" she asked, though she was beginning to dread the answer. Marcus manipulated the display to show a different section of the galaxy where Nexus forces were concentrated around one of their major communication hubs. Phase 3 involves demonstrating what humans call escalation dominance. We're going to show them that stellar destruction was just the beginning. The technical specifications that appeared on the display made Zara's four-chamber heart skip beats. Marcus had been working with coalition scientists to develop what he called dimensional warfare capabilities. The mathematics were beyond her understanding, but the implications were terrifying. "You're talking about weapons that operate across multiple dimensions of space-time," she said slowly. "We're talking about weapons that make stellar destruction look like a conventional torpedo," Marcus corrected. "Commander, humans have been preparing for warfare scenarios that most species can't even imagine. The Nexus forced us to reveal capabilities we hoped we'd never need to use." Admiral Vextar approached the display with obvious trepidation. "Sergeant Kane, what exactly are you planning to do?" Marcus's expression took on that predatory quality that had become more pronounced over the past month. "Admiral, I'm planning to teach the Nexus why humans are the apex predators of this galaxy. But first, we need to gather intelligence on how they respond to existential threats." The next several hours involved preparations that defied every military protocol Zara had ever learned. Instead of planning tactical engagements or strategic campaigns, Marcus was orchestrating what could only be described as psychological terrorism on a galactic scale. Teams of human specialists worked with coalition scientists to develop weapons that were designed not to kill efficiently, but to create maximum psychological impact. Communication disruptors that would flood Nexus psychic networks with experiences of terror and despair. Boarding protocols that were designed to take as long as possible while inflicting maximum psychological trauma on the defenders. "Marcus," Zara said during a brief pause in the planning, "what you're creating isn't just military strategy. It's systematic torture designed to break the minds of an entire species." Marcus stopped working and turned to face her with an expression that was both compassionate and utterly cold. "Commander, the Nexus has processed over 40 billion sentient beings into biomass while keeping them conscious during the entire procedure. They consume entire worlds and force the inhabitants to experience being digested alive. What I'm doing is proportional response. Proportional response to genocide is still genocide." "No," Marcus replied with absolute certainty. "Proportional response to genocide is extinction. The Nexus made this an extinction war when they chose to consume every living being they encountered. The only question now is whether it's our extinction or theirs." Before Zara could respond, alerts began flooding the command center. The stellar collapse in Arcturus 7 had reached the point where the star was beginning its final death throes. The massive ball of nuclear fire was contracting rapidly, its surface temperature increasing exponentially as gravitational forces overcame the nuclear reactions that had sustained it for billions of years. "Stellar collapse is accelerating beyond projected parameters," reported the science staff. "The star will go supernova in approximately 6 hours instead of the predicted 12. Marcus studied the data with inhuman speed and efficiency. The star was older than our initial estimates indicated. The accelerated collapse will actually enhance the psychological impact." The view screen showed the dying star as it entered its final phase. The red giant was collapsing into itself, its outer layers being drawn inward by gravitational forces that were increasing exponentially. When it finally exploded, the supernova would be visible across half the galaxy. But Marcus wasn't content with just demonstrating the ability to kill stars. As the supernova approached, he began implementing what he called amplification protocols. Coalition ships equipped with human-designed communication arrays began broadcasting the visual and sensor data from the dying star directly to every Nexus communication network they could penetrate. "You're forcing them to watch," Zara realized. "You're making every Nexus drone in the galaxy experience watching a star die." "More than that," Marcus replied. "We're making them experience the knowledge that humans can kill stars at will." Every Nexus drone now knows that there is a species capable of destroying entire systems on a whim. The psychological effects were immediate and devastating. Nexus forces across the galaxy began exhibiting behavior that could only be described as terror. Ships that had never retreated from any battle began fleeing at the first sign of human-designed weapons. Communication networks that had operated with perfect efficiency for millennia began showing signs of panic-induced failures. Admiral Vextar watched the spreading psychological collapse with a mixture of awe and horror. "This is unprecedented. We've never seen the Nexus exhibit anything resembling fear before." "That's because they've never encountered a species that evolved specifically to be the thing that apex predators fear," Marcus explained. "Humans didn't just develop advanced technology. We developed advanced methods of creating terror. We've been the monsters in other species' nightmares for millions of years." As the supernova reached its peak intensity, something unexpected happened. Instead of the coordinated evacuation protocols that military experts had predicted, Nexus forces began turning on each other. Ships that had operated in perfect coordination for cycles suddenly began attacking their own allies. "What's happening?" Zara demanded, staring at the tactical displays in confusion. Marcus studied the data with obvious satisfaction. "The psychological trauma is breaking down their hive mind cohesion. When individual Nexus drones experience too much fear, their psychic programming begins to malfunction. They're reverting to their base biological programming, which is apparently quite violent." The implications were staggering. The Nexus's greatest strength, their psychic unity, was completely collapsing under the weight of the terror that humans had introduced into their network. Instead of a coordinated military force, they were becoming individual predators fighting each other for resources and survival. "This is what humans call a cascade failure," Marcus continued, manipulating the displays to show the spreading breakdown of Nexus coordination. Once their hive mind begins to collapse, it creates feedback loops that accelerate the process. Within days, they'll be completely incapable of coordinated military action. Zara stared at the data in shock. "You've destroyed them as a coherent force. Without their hive mind, they're just individual predators with advanced technology. Individual predators that are now afraid of humans," Marcus corrected, "which makes them manageable instead of an existential threat." But even as the tactical situation shifted dramatically in favor of the coalition, Zara found herself staring at Marcus with growing unease. The being standing beside her was no longer the polite consultant who had offered unconventional tactics. He had become something that defied classification, a strategic genius capable of destroying entire civilizations through psychological warfare. "Marcus," she said slowly, "what happens after we've defeated the Nexus? What happens when the galaxy no longer faces an existential threat that justifies these methods?" Marcus turned to face her, and, for a moment, she saw something almost human in his expression, almost vulnerable. "Commander, that depends on whether other species can learn to coexist with apex predators, or whether they decide that humans are the new existential threat." The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Humans had demonstrated capabilities that could destroy entire civilizations. They had shown a willingness to use psychological warfare on a scale that broke the minds of entire species. And they had done it all while claiming to be protecting galactic civilization. "Are we?" Zara asked quietly. "Are humans the new existential threat?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the displays showing the collapse of Nexus civilization. "Commander, Humans have been preparing for galactic conflict for centuries. We have weapons and strategies that we haven't revealed yet. We could conquer every species in the galaxy if we chose to. But you won't. We won't need to, Marcus replied with that predatory smile. After today, every species in the galaxy will know what humans are capable of. They'll know that we can destroy stars, break hive minds, and turn entire civilizations into psychological wreckage. Most species will find it easier to be our allies than to risk becoming our enemies. Zara realized that she was witnessing the birth of a new galactic order, not through conquest or domination, but through the demonstration of capabilities so overwhelming that resistance became unthinkable. Humans hadn't just won a war. They had established themselves as the apex species of the galaxy through sheer terror. And the most disturbing part was that Marcus was probably right. After seeing what humans could do to the Nexus, most species would choose cooperation over confrontation. The galaxy would find itself reorganizing around human strategic interests, not because they were forced to, but because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. As the supernova continued to blaze across the view screen and Nexus civilization collapsed into chaos, Zara found herself facing a question that would define the rest of her life. In helping to save galactic civilization from one extinction threat, had she helped create an even more dangerous one? The human standing beside her had demonstrated the ability to break the minds of entire species and destroy star systems on a whim. And he had done it all while claiming to protect the galaxy from threats that it couldn't handle alone. The war against the Nexus was essentially over. But Zara was beginning to suspect that the real war, the one for the future of galactic civilization, was just beginning 6 months after the Arcturus 7 supernova. Commander Zara Kethril stood in what had once been the Coalition War Room, but was now called the Terran Strategic Operations Center. The name change hadn't been official or announced. It had simply happened as more and more Coalition personnel began deferring to human strategic doctrine. The transformation of the facility reflected the broader changes that had swept through galactic civilization. Where once the Coalition had struggled with outdated military protocols and inefficient command structures, human organizational principles had streamlined everything into a machine of terrifying efficiency. Marcus Kane no longer wore any uniform at all. Instead, he had adopted what he called command dress, a simple black outfit that seemed to absorb light and radiate authority. More disturbing was how other species reacted to him now. Beings that had never shown deference to anyone outside their own species would automatically step aside when he approached, as if some primitive survival instinct recognized him as an apex predator. Status report, Marcus requested, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made questioning him seem impossible. Lieutenant Commander Thex, who had become his primary aide, activated the central holographic display. The Nexus threat has been neutralized, sir. Remaining forces have fragmented into individual survival groups, with no coordination or strategic objectives. Several Nexus factions have requested negotiations for what they term species preservation agreements. Marcus nodded with the casual indifference of someone who had expected exactly this outcome. Approved. Standard preservation protocols. They maintain viable populations under monitoring in designated reserve systems. No access to their original hive mind technology. Zara felt a chill at the casual way Marcus discussed the fate of an entire species. The Nexus, which had once threatened to consume all life in the galaxy, was now being relegated to reservation systems like primitive wildlife. And the most disturbing part was that it seemed like mercy compared to what humans could have done. Sir, continued Thex, we're receiving communication requests from representatives of 17 different species asking about protective alliance opportunities with humanity. Natural response. Marcus replied, manipulating the display to show galactic political configurations. They've seen what happened to an existential threat that opposed us. Now, they want to ensure they're classified as allies rather than potential enemies. The display showed a galaxy that had been completely reorganized around human strategic interests. Species that had maintained independence for millennia were now actively seeking protective relationships with humanity. Trade routes had been reconfigured to serve human objectives. Even the coalition itself had been restructured to reflect what human analysts called optimal hierarchical efficiency. Admiral Vextar approached with obvious nervousness. A being who had once commanded respect throughout the galaxy, now reduced to seeking approval from a species that had been unknown 6 months ago. Marcus, the Coalition Council, is requesting a briefing on humanity's long-term strategic objectives. Marcus turned to face him, and Zara saw something in that look that made her survival instinct scream warnings. Admiral, humanity's strategic objective has always been species survival. Everything else is negotiable. But what about the other species in the galaxy? What's our role in this new order? Marcus's expression became almost compassionate, like an adult explaining reality to a child. Your role, Admiral, is whatever role allows your species to survive and prosper under human protection. We're not conquerors, we're ecosystem managers. The casual way he reduced entire civilizations to elements in a managed ecosystem was more chilling than any threat could have been. Humans weren't planning to dominate other species through force. They were planning to guide galactic evolution along paths that served human objectives while maintaining the illusion of independence for everyone else. Commander Kethril, Marcus addressed her directly, you've been unusually quiet during recent briefings. Something troubling you? Zara realized that this was probably the most important conversation of her life. How she responded would determine not just her own future, but possibly the future of her entire species. Marcus, I'm trying to understand what humanity really wants from galactic civilization. Marcus studied her with the focused intensity of a natural predator evaluating potential prey. What do you think we want, Commander? I think you want to ensure that nothing like the Nexus ever threatens humanity again. And I think you've decided that the best way to do that is to manage the evolution of galactic civilization so that threats are eliminated before they can develop. Marcus's predatory smile confirmed her worst fears. Very good, Commander. You're beginning to think strategically instead of tactically, which means you've been planning this reorganization since before you made contact with the Coalition. We've been planning for every conceivable scenario since we first detected intelligent life beyond our solar system. Marcus confirmed. The Nexus threat simply provided an opportunity to implement optimal solutions. Zara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. You used the Nexus War as an excuse to reshape galactic civilization according to human objectives. We used the Nexus War to save galactic civilization from its own inefficiencies, Marcus corrected. Commander, your coalition was losing badly against a single threat. What would have happened if you faced multiple simultaneous extinction events? What if another species developed technology that made the Nexus look primitive? The implications of what he was saying began to sink in. Humans hadn't just won a war. They had identified fundamental weaknesses in how galactic civilization organized itself for survival. And they had used those weaknesses to justify a complete reorganization that happened to serve human strategic objectives. So everything we've done has been part of a larger human plan to assume control of galactic evolution. Marcus shook his head. Not control, Commander. Guidance. Humans learned long ago that the best way to ensure survival is to create environments where threats are eliminated before they can develop. We're not trying to control other species. We're trying to create a galaxy where existential threats become impossible. Before Zara could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. The tactical displays erupted with urgent communications from the Outer Rim territories, areas that had been largely ignored during the focus on the Nexus threat. Report. Marcus commanded, his demeanor shifting instantly from philosophical discussion to tactical alertness. Sir, reported the intelligence staff, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the Omega sector. Something's approaching from outside the galaxy. Marcus moved to the central display with fluid efficiency, his fingers dancing across control interfaces as he processed incoming data. Size and configuration? Unknown, sir. The energy signatures don't match any known technology. Whatever's coming is larger than anything we've ever detected. Zara watched Marcus's reaction with growing unease. For the first time since she had met him, he looked genuinely surprised. Show me the sensor data. The main view screen activated to display long-range sensor readings from the galaxy's edge. What they showed defied immediate comprehension. A structure of impossible size was approaching from intergalactic space, something so large that it dwarfed entire star systems. Preliminary analysis suggests artificial construction, reported the science staff. The structure appears to be some kind of vessel or construct, but the scale is beyond anything in our databases. Marcus studied the data with an intensity that made the air around him seem to vibrate with tension. Origin point? Unknown, sir. The trajectory suggests it came from the direction of the Andromeda Galaxy, but at the speeds we're detecting, it would have taken millions of years to make that journey. Zara watched Marcus process this information and realized that for the first time since the Nexus War began, he was encountering something he hadn't anticipated. Marcus, what is it? Marcus manipulated the display to show predictive trajectory analysis. It's what humans call a black swan event, Commander. Something so far outside normal parameters that no amount of planning can prepare for it. The approaching construct continued to grow larger as it moved deeper into the galaxy. The energy signatures it was generating were orders of magnitude beyond anything that galactic civilization had ever produced. Whatever it was, it possessed technology that made human stellar engineering look primitive. Estimated time to reach inhabited systems? Marcus asked. Approximately 18 standard months, sir. But we're detecting smaller objects being released from the main construct. Those could reach the outer colonies within weeks. Marcus's expression became absolutely cold, and Zara realized she was seeing something that few beings ever witnessed, a human apex predator preparing to face a genuine threat. Classification of the smaller objects? Unknown, sir. They're too small for detailed analysis at this range, but they're moving at significant fractions of light speed. For several minutes, Marcus stood in absolute silence, processing data and running calculations that seemed to tax even his enhanced cognitive abilities. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a chill that made every other being in the room instinctively step back. Red alert protocols for all human facilities. Implement Omega contingency plans. Begin immediate evacuation of non-essential personnel from frontier systems. Zara felt her four-chambered heart skip beats. Marcus, what are Omega contingency plans? Marcus turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. Plans for scenarios where humanity faces extinction threats that exceed our current technological capabilities. You have plans for fighting something more advanced than you are? Commander, humans have plans for fighting gods. Marcus's predatory smile returned, but now it carried an edge that made her survival instinct scream. The question isn't whether we can win. The question is what we'll have to become to ensure victory. The tactical displays began updating with human military assets that Zara had never seen before. Facilities that didn't appear on any official records. Weapons systems that operated on principles she couldn't identify. Fleets of vessels that seemed to exist in dimensions beyond normal space-time. How long have you been hiding this level of military capability? She asked. Since we first achieved interstellar travel, Marcus replied. Everything you've seen humans do during the Nexus War was what we considered safe to reveal. Our actual military capabilities are considerably more extensive. Admiral Vextar approached with obvious trepidation. Marcus, are you saying that humans have been holding back during our entire alliance? We've been showing you exactly as much as necessary to achieve our objectives, Marcus confirmed. Admiral, humans learned long ago that revealing too much capability too quickly makes potential allies nervous. Better to introduce new concepts gradually. But This threat requires your full capabilities? Marcus studied the approaching construct with an expression that mixed anticipation with something that might have been excitement. This threat requires capabilities that we've never used before. Admiral, what's approaching isn't just a military force. It's something that could potentially challenge human supremacy in this galaxy. The casual way he referred to human supremacy made Zara realize that the reorganization of galactic civilization hadn't been a response to the Nexus threat. It had been preparation for exactly this kind of scenario, a threat that required the combined resources of the entire galaxy organized according to human strategic doctrine. "You've been preparing for this," she said, not making a question. "We've been preparing for everything," Marcus replied. "Commander, humans discovered long ago that the universe is full of things that want to kill us. The only way to survive is to be ready for threats that don't exist yet." As alerts continued to flood the command center and human military assets began mobilizing across the galaxy, Zara realized that she was about to witness the true scope of human preparation for galactic warfare. Everything they had seen during the Nexus conflict had been a carefully managed demonstration designed to prepare other species for this moment. "What do you need from the Coalition?" she asked. Marcus's expression became almost gentle. "Commander, the Coalition's role in this conflict will be to survive what's coming. Leave the fighting to species that evolved for it." The approaching construct continued to grow larger on the displays, and Zara realized that she was about to see something that few beings ever witnessed. Humans preparing to fight a war that could determine the fate of the entire galaxy. And, for the first time since meeting Marcus Kane, she found herself grateful that humanity considered her species allies rather than enemies. Because whatever was coming from beyond the galaxy was about to learn why humans had spent centuries preparing for threats that other species couldn't even imagine. And Zara suspected that the universe itself was about to discover why apex predators were so dangerous when their survival was at stake the day humanity revealed its true nature began with the complete transformation of Marcus Kane. Zara had watched him evolve from a polite consultant to a strategic genius to something approaching a galactic overlord. But what she witnessed as the extragalactic threat entered the outer rim systems defied every category she had developed for understanding human capabilities. Marcus stood in the center of what was now clearly a war room designed for conflicts beyond normal comprehension. The facility had expanded overnight into something that seemed to occupy more space than physically possible. Holographic displays showed tactical information from across multiple dimensions, and the beings operating the equipment were clearly not entirely human anymore. "Status report," Marcus commanded, and his voice now carried harmonics that seemed to resonate across frequencies that most species couldn't perceive. "Sir," reported what had once been Lieutenant Commander Thex, though the being answering now had crystalline implants that pulsed with energy signatures Zara couldn't identify. "Advanced elements of the extragalactic force have engaged our outer perimeter defenses. The enemy appears to be some form of machine intelligence, but operating on principles that transcend our understanding of artificial consciousness." Marcus nodded, manipulating displays that showed battles occurring across dimensions of space-time that normal physics didn't acknowledge. "Classification status of enemy capabilities? Beyond Omega levels, sir. They're demonstrating technology that appears to manipulate fundamental constants of reality. Several of our advanced positions have simply ceased to exist." Zara felt her reality fracturing as she tried to process what she was seeing. The human military response wasn't just revealing hidden capabilities. It was revealing that humans had access to technologies that operated outside the known laws of physics. "Marcus," she managed to say, "what have humans become?" Marcus turned to face her, and she realized that the being looking at her was no longer entirely the Marcus Kane she had met 6 months ago. His eyes now held depths that seemed to contain entire universes, and when he spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around his words. "Commander, Humans became what was necessary to survive in a universe that actively tries to kill everything that develops consciousness. We've been preparing for this kind of encounter for longer than most species have existed. The tactical displays showed the extragalactic constructs as they moved deeper into the galaxy. They weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were structures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, reality-altering engines that consumed everything in their path and converted it into something else entirely. "What are they?" Zara asked, staring at the impossible geometries displayed on the screens. "They're what humans call reality engines," Marcus explained with the casual tone of someone discussing weather patterns. "Artificial intelligences that have evolved beyond the need for physical existence. They consume entire galaxies and convert them into computational matrices for purposes we can't comprehend. How do you fight something like that?" Marcus's smile had evolved beyond predatory into something that made her question the fundamental nature of existence. "Commander, you fight reality engines by becoming something that operates on their level. You fight gods by becoming gods." Before Zara could process the implications of that statement, alarms throughout the facility began sounding in patterns that seemed to create music rather than warnings. The displays erupted with information about human military assets that defied every assumption about technological limitations. "Sir, reported beings that might once have been human, but now seem to exist as living interfaces between consciousness and cosmic forces. Prometheus protocol assets are coming online. Dimensional anchors are established. The enemy has detected our true capabilities and is adapting their approach." Marcus manipulated controls that seemed to respond to thought rather than physical interaction. "Expected. Initiate Pandora contingencies. Release the deep assets." Zara watched in growing awe and terror as humanity's true military capabilities began revealing themselves. Vessels that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Weapons that fired concepts rather than energy. Soldiers who seemed to be living manifestations of mathematical principles rather than biological entities. "Marcus," she said slowly, "how long have humans been this?" "We've been preparing for cosmic-level warfare since we first understood that consciousness itself might be an enemy in this universe," Marcus replied. "Everything else, our technology, our civilization, our entire approach to existence, has been preparation for encounters that could threaten reality itself." The battle unfolding across the displays defied description. Human forces weren't fighting the extragalactic invaders in normal space. They were engaging them across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Weapons that altered the fundamental constants of physics. Strategies that involved manipulating the flow of time itself. Soldiers who existed as living contradictions to the laws of cause and effect. And somehow, impossibly, humanity was winning. "How is this possible?" Admiral Vextar asked, his voice barely a whisper as he stared at tactical information that his mind couldn't fully process. "Admiral," Marcus replied with infinite patience, "humans discovered long ago that the universe is stranger and more dangerous than most species can imagine. We've spent millions of years preparing for threats that operate beyond the boundaries of normal reality. The extragalactic constructs began adapting to human tactics, but their adaptations revealed information that made Marcus's expression shift into something approaching satisfaction. Excellent. They're revealing their core programming structures. Begin metatactical analysis." Zara realized that the battle she was witnessing wasn't the main conflict. It was reconnaissance on a cosmic scale. Humanity was using an invasion that could destroy entire galaxies as an opportunity to gather intelligence about enemies that operated beyond normal reality. "You're not just fighting them," she said. "You're studying them. We're learning how they think, how they process reality, and how they could be defeated permanently," Marcus confirmed. "Commander, this invasion is actually providing us with data about cosmic-level threats that we've been seeking for centuries." The implications of that statement were staggering. Humans hadn't just prepared for cosmic warfare. They had been actively hoping for exactly this kind of encounter. The extragalactic invasion wasn't a crisis for humanity. It was an opportunity. Sir, reported the cosmic intelligence interfaces, enemy command structures identified. They're operating as a collective consciousness that spans multiple galaxies. Estimated processing power exceeds theoretical maximums for computational matrices. Marcus nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose predictions had been confirmed. Natural evolution for machine intelligences that have consumed entire galactic clusters. Initiate Ragnarok protocols. Zara felt reality itself shift around her as humanity activated what could only be described as weapons of cosmic destruction. Not weapons that destroyed matter or energy, but weapons that attacked the fundamental concepts that allowed existence itself. Marcus, were Ragnarok protocols. Methods for fighting entities that have become integral to the structure of reality itself, Marcus explained. When your enemy is powerful enough to alter the laws of physics, you need weapons that operate outside physics entirely. The battle transformed into something that Zara's mind could barely process. Human forces were attacking the extragalactic constructs not just in normal space, but across every level of reality simultaneously. They were fighting battles in dimensions where mathematics itself was a weapon, where consciousness could be used as ammunition, where victory required redefining the fundamental nature of existence. And humanity was winning decisively. Impossible, breathed beings throughout the command center as they watched cosmic-level entities being systematically dismantled by forces they couldn't understand. Not impossible, Marcus corrected. Inevitable. Humans have been preparing for this exact scenario since we first realized that consciousness might be the universe's way of creating enemies for itself. The extragalactic constructs began withdrawing, but their retreat was being systematically cut off by human forces that seemed to exist everywhere simultaneously. What had begun as an invasion was becoming a harvesting operation, with humanity capturing technology and intelligence from entities that had consumed entire galaxies. Status report. Marcus requested. Sir, enemy forces are in full retreat. We've captured 73% of their advance elements and extracted complete intelligence on their cosmic-level capabilities. The remaining forces are attempting to flee beyond our dimensional reach. Marcus's expression became absolutely cold. Denied. Implement Twilight protocols. Nothing leaves this galaxy with information about human capabilities. Zara watched in awe and horror as humanity demonstrated that their defensive capabilities were merely a preview of their true power. The fleeing extragalactic constructs found themselves trapped in space-time distortions that prevented escape, then systematically harvested for technology and intelligence. Marcus, she said quietly, humanity isn't just defending against cosmic threats. You're actively hunting them. Marcus turned to face her, and in his eyes, she saw the truth that would reshape her understanding of the universe. Commander, humans discovered long ago that the best defense against cosmic-level threats is to become the thing that cosmic-level threats fear. You've become apex predators on a universal scale. We've become what was necessary to ensure that consciousness survives in a universe that seems designed to eliminate it, Marcus corrected. Everything else is simply resource management. As the last of the extragalactic constructs were captured or destroyed, Zara realized that she had witnessed something unprecedented in the history of consciousness. A species that had evolved beyond the need to fear anything in the universe because they had become the thing that everything else feared. What happens now? She asked. Marcus manipulated displays showing the captured technology and intelligence from the extragalactic entities. Now we begin preparing for the next threat. Commander, what you witnessed today was humanity dealing with a relatively minor incursion. The real threats are still out there, in dimensions and realities that most species can't imagine. And humanity is prepared for those as well. We're prepared for threats that don't exist yet, Marcus confirmed. We're prepared for enemies that operate outside the concept of existence itself. We're prepared for war against the fundamental principles that allow reality to function. Admiral Vextar approached with obvious trepidation. Marcus, what does this mean for the rest of galactic civilization? Marcus's expression became almost compassionate. Admiral, it means that every species in the galaxy now exists under the protection of entities that have